So Dan Mullen's out, and we've discussed that. Where is Florida going from here? Because this is about to be really interesting, and there were some thoughts that I've shared with you over the last 14 days, really, about how I thought a lot of the talk out there was foolish about the Florida job and about Dan Mullen and whether you needed to see more from him. You didn't need to see any more. You didn't need to see last night. In fact, I think it's pathetic that some folks believe in their heart of hearts they needed to see Missouri convert 2 points at the end of a game in overtime to know whether Dan Mullen was good enough. Now, it ended up going against Florida, and so he's out of a job. If it really came down to that, shame on the folks in charge. I'm not so sure that's the way it actually happened. But you don't have to take it from me. Scott Strickland, the athletic director down there, he did speak on this. He had a press conference today. They don't have to do that for you, by the way. So hats off to Scott Strickland for at least stepping up and speaking to the public. He was asked a number of things, obviously, Scott Strickland being the AD down there. And he's been with Mullen for a long time. He was with Mullen at Mississippi State and at Florida. So this was probably not an easy conversation that he had with Dan Mullen. But he was asked, I believe by Andy Staples, what is the expectation? What do you expect in the next head coach? And his quote was, the expectation at Florida is to compete at a high level and compete for a sustained period of time. Very important. That is directly correlated with recruiting. What he's saying is we don't want to build to a crescendo every 3 or 4 years. This is not some developmental project of a program. No, we need to be there every year. Our neighbors in Athens or Tuscaloosa or Baton Rouge, we expect the same thing they expect. He's right. He should feel that way. Number two, and this is what I've been harping on for a while now. Folks have been talking about this crowded market. Everybody and their cousin has been talking about how, well, Florida's not already in the market. They need to just pump the brakes because this market's already crowded. No, I've never felt that way. And someone asked Scott Strickland about it today, and his quote about this crowded market out there and whether Florida should have entered it was, what other schools are doing shouldn't impact the University of Florida. End of sentence, end of thought, and should be end of conversation because he's right. Florida is the program that other folks already in the market should hope don't enter the market. Because if the right folks have their hands on the wheel at Florida, they can come in and take the candidates that you otherwise would have had a shot at. It's not the other way around. You don't take the candidates Florida's going to have a shot at. There are only 2 or 3 programs out there, and I'm not even including USC in that conversation, so maybe LSU, and then you can kind of stop the conversation, that could even attempt something like that if the right decisions are being made at Florida, if the proper commitment is invested at Florida, which I have reason to believe it is. Thirdly, and this was probably, I think, the most misguided, or if you want to use a more direct term, foolish notion that we have heard presented about Florida in general in the last month. And that is this notion that expectations have just been too high there. So it's not Dan Mullen's fault. Expectations are just too high. Because for some reason, there is this camp. It's a small camp, but there is this camp of people amongst the Florida media ecosystem, did I say that right? Media ecosystem, that believe the expectation there, for whatever reason, should not be championships, should not be perennially competing to win the SEC. And again, I voiced my disagreement with that. But someone asked Scott Strickland about it. And again, he didn't answer this any different than I would if I were the AD at Florida. I've got it written. I don't know why I took time to waste ink on this. Someone said, are the expectations too high at Florida, Scott? He said, no, I don't think so. That was it. That was all he said. And then it was just this awkward pause, and you could tell everyone on the Zoom call was waiting. Is he going to expound on this? And then they realized, oh, he kind of said no, so I guess he doesn't need to expound. Good for Scott Strickland. Those are words. They have to back them up with an action of hiring the right guy. I get all that. But I would much rather have someone who is at least saying the right things leading my program over someone who stumbles all over themselves and keeps adjusting their glasses and fumbles through prepared statements. That's not what he did. He spoke off the cuff, and he spoke honestly, and now let's hope that this gets put into action, and then those dominoes fall, and the last one has the name of what turns out to be a championship-winning head coach. Where will the search go, though? That's what everyone wants to know. Where's the Florida coaching search going to go? Well, the first thing I want to know, and these are kind of tied, the first 2 points I'm going to make, they're kind of tied together. First 2 things you've got to know about the Florida coaching search. Number one, how do you define an elite candidate? How much do you value recruiting? If you had a pie chart, how big is the percentage that you want focused on recruiting? How much do you value in-game strategy? Do you look at that whole Ted Lasso, Sam Pittman model where, well, let's go get an energizer. Let's go get a CEO type. Maybe we don't value a guy who has cut his teeth as a perfectionist or a guy who's at the top of his craft on a particular side of the ball. Maybe we trust a guy to come in here and bring those assistants in because we're going to give him a big enough salary pool. Also, is there a certain way, as it turns out, that Florida prefers to win? This may sound dumb, but it is a very, very popular notion around Florida that it's not just about winning, although that is the name of the game at the end of the day. There's a certain way they want to win. They want to win the way Steve Spurrier did it. They don't want to win 13-9. They want to win flashy. They don't care about getting in your face. They don't care about rubbing you the wrong way. They don't care about every now and then a quote coming out of the mouth of the head coach that rubs some people the wrong way. Which is why the first name a lot of people are going to have come into mind when they think about an open job at the University of Florida is Lane Kiffin. And I guarantee you the University of Florida has always been on the tip of Lane Kiffin's tongue. And he'd probably bear crawl over broken glass the moment this job was offered to him, if it is. I had a former head coach in the SEC text me a little while ago. And he said, what do we think about Kiffin at Florida? And here's what I think about Kiffin at Florida. I'll tell you the same thing I told him. There's no one who is indifferent on Lane Kiffin. You are either red hot on him or you're ice cold on him. Here's what I believe the case to be. I believe the case is in any given major athletic department when you have to have a certain amount of endorsement. Even if you're the guy, even if Scott Strickland is the guy running this thing, or at LSU, even if Scott Woodward is the guy running this thing, this is the real world college athletics at a high level. You're not making a hire against the better wishes of certain people. Let's just put it that way. And what do those certain people think? With Lane Kiffin, it's been very hard to get a consensus buy-in amongst all those important people. So at Florida, the same question that exists at LSU or any other major job where Kiffin's name is spoken will be this. Do you have sign-off from all the voices that you need sign-off with? And it's been very hard when you've spoken to folks behind the scenes in both the coaching world, administrative world, and the agent world. It's been very hard for the representation of Lane Kiffin to get that consensus sign-off. Normally what it is there are a couple of folks who say, Kiffin would kill it here. And then there's one person over there who says, yeah, but what about this? And then there's this other person over the corner, yeah, and I don't want to worry about this either. Now you can fill in the blank with whatever this may be. I'm telling you, the guy's handled himself very well at Ole Miss. And I'm also telling you, there are a lot of folks out there who would say, Jeff Lebby doesn't get enough credit there. Jeff Lebby does a lion's share of the hauling on that offense. Okay, great. I'm not gonna disparage Jeff Lebby. Lane Kiffin, man, he's making a killing getting those former Baylor assistants that can't really go anywhere else. Or Kendall Briles, and that's how he's done it recently. Well, good for Lane Kiffin if that's the case. All you've just accused him of is going to getting really good assistants. Why should I believe that wouldn't be the case at Florida? I can tell you this. Here's what I think. Because I've got my number one. It's not Lane Kiffin. I got my number one, and I'll list them in a second. I will at least say this. One of the most fundamental things I've always wanted to achieve in a coaching search is making my opponent sweat when I make the announcement. And God bless Mark Stoops and some of the other names who are going to be mentioned in this search. There are going to be a lot of quality candidates. I think Billy Napier would be a very good hire here. I would never leave Kentucky if I were Mark Stoops, but he'd be a quality hire. None of them, and friends, I mean none of them, would make the folks in Athens, Georgia, sweat more than if they woke up tomorrow morning and Lane Kiffin had been hired at the University of Florida. That's not me telling you he's necessarily the right one. I'm just telling you, you know good and well what I'm talking about. If you're a Georgia fan, you wake up tomorrow morning and you see Billy Napier hired and you see in an alternate universe Lane Kiffin hired. Which one makes you sweat more? I mean, I think you know the answer to that. Now, the guy I'd go after if I had an open head coaching position right now, coast to coast, would be Dave Aranda. I don't think he is restricted to succeeding in a specific region. I could not care less if I had an opening in San Diego, California, or Bangor, Maine. They need to take football a little more seriously in Maine, and I've always thought that. But if I had a job opening at the University of Florida, Southern Cal, LSU, anywhere in between, Dave Aranda is my number one call. Dave Aranda is the guy who checks every single box that I want. Dave Aranda knows how to build and then lead an organization. He knows how to get buy-in. He knows how to instill championship culture. Scott Strickland at Florida today spoke about a sustained product of excellence. That means you can't have the wild swings. It can't be a roller coaster. You got to get to a cruising altitude, and you got to have a guy who knows how to get it off the ground. But then once you get it off the ground, you also got to have a guy who knows how to fly it. And it's not up and down. It's not up. Your tray table's not having to stay in its upright and locked position because there's so much turbulence. No, you cruise at a high level. Dave Aranda is the guy I believe that is uniquely equipped, even unto any of these other candidates out there, to achieve that. He would do it at Florida. He'd do it at USC. He'd do it at LSU. Dave Aranda is, while he may not be represented by the right folks, Dave Aranda is the right guy for your job. And so that's the one I would push for at Florida. And if I were running both organizations, then I would compete against myself at LSU and Florida for the same person. Dave Aranda is the guy for all these jobs. There is going to be a lot of regret down the road for, I think, some programs, not just Florida. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think LSU is pursuing him hard enough. And I hope that that changes, for their sake, because it would be a shame for Aranda to have come through the South and then get locked down by USC. And I don't necessarily have the best feel for where USC is in their search. But I do think there have been some names mentioned in their search that probably in reality aren't at the forefront nearly to the degree that, let's say, the college football media sphere has led you to believe. I think Dave Aranda is there. And if USC does end up locking him down, then that would be a home run. Florida should very much go after Dave Aranda. That is my field. Billy Napier is going to be a name that's mentioned a lot here, as I said a little while ago. Billy Napier has waited for this job. Billy Napier has slow played some other programs with job openings in hopes of seeing something like this come open. And it's open now. And the folks at Florida, I think, would be very receptive, and by folks I mean fans. I think the fans there would be very receptive to a Billy Napier hiring. The thing about it is, and I'll move on here, we're going to talk a lot more about this week. There are not 5 Grand Slam candidates out there as you would define Grand Slam. But I want you to remember how many Grand Slams have fizzled out and how many bunts have ended up being Grand Slams. Dabo Swinney is the most famous example that comes to mind, but I think most recently about Ryan Day. Ohio State had the unique opportunity to not even have to leave the zip code up there to find the right guy. But Ohio State could have had their choice of almost anyone. And they went with Ryan Day. Why? Because they ignored all the hot boards out there, and they just knew the characteristics they were looking for, and they got the guy that fit the most of those characteristics. It's the exact same thing Florida has to do. What are the critical traits and characteristics they're looking for? We expect to learn a lot more about that in the coming days.